The wreck of the Admiral Graf Spee lies partially submerged off the coast of Uruguay, a haunting reminder of the early battles of World War II.
The Admiral Graf Spee wreck was supposed to be a silent grave. Instead, an underwater drone surfaced a truth that felt almost staged by fate. A World War II Titan, long tied to Hitler's war machine, looked too intact for the story we were told. And what the cameras caught inside shifted the blame, the timeline, and the legend. This isn't just about steel on the seafloor. It's about choices made in fire and secrets sealed in mud.
On December 14, 1939, newspapers around the world headlined the story of the Graf Spee.
This is the wreck of the Graf Spee, lying on the seafloor just 65 feet.
If the drone is right, the final minutes weren't what the victors wrote. They were far darker and far more deliberate. Forbidden legend, modern hunt. They called Admiral Graf Spee a forbidden wreck for a reason. It was not just steel on the seafloor. It was a symbol linked to a regime the world still struggles to speak about without flinching. The location, the depth, the politics, and the weight of the story meant no casual expedition would ever be allowed to poke around. Access requires method, patience, and machines that do not panic in places where light cannot live. The crew that went out to meet it knew they weren't filming a souvenir. They were walking into a closed room where history had locked the door. The mission plan made that clear from the start. A disciplined grid search. Sensors tuned to peel back silt and darkness one pass at a time. No hero shots, no shortcuts. The first move was to map the emptiness. They dragged the search box into neat rows, mowing the lawn, letting sonar paint a ghost image of terrain no human eye had seen. Hours turned into days. Monitors stared back with nothing but static relief, mud flats, low undulations, and random spikes that always turned out to be stones. The ship, if it was there, was quiet, silent, but present, like a breath you feel without hearing. To beat the dark, they trusted their machines. The ROV was not flashy. It was a steel sled with a job. High-resolution cameras rode up front, each framed by harsh lights angled to knife through suspended grit. Sonar beams pulsed and returned a shape where eyes would only see fog. Every cable, every control, every voltage was tested twice before launch. Because at that depth, failure is not dramatic, it's final. The crew learned the rhythm: launch, tow, sweep, review. They marked false leads in red, maybe objects in yellow, and anything that hinted at geometry as bright orange. Then a scatter appeared, twisted plates, ribs, a curve that belonged to the hull, not rock. The mood on deck flipped from long quiet to tight focus. They tightened the search box around the debris field and followed the trail like crumbs. The screen gave them angles that could only come from a giant made by hands, not nature. And then the shape took over the frame. It rose out of the dark like a cliff, as if it had been set down rather than fallen. The ROV lights raked across plating, seams, and massive lines that still read like design, not ruin. Eerie, almost polite, the hull stood upright on the slope of an extinct submarine ridge, facing the quiet, as if waiting. No one expected dignity. They found it anyway. But dignity did not mean peace. The stern was missing, a torn absence where the ship's spine should have carried on. The debris path told a secondary story, an impact, a slide, a long scrape down the mountainside that scarred metal in drifts and ribbons. Even so, the main body refused to look destroyed. It looked halted. The team took the hint and shifted from find to forensic. They plotted camera runs along the waterline, then above it, then below, building a layered image to compare with battle accounts. They traced gashes and counted penetrations with the calm tone of surveyors, not storytellers. They logged angles, blast margins, fold directions, and tear patterns. They measured where plating had bent inward, where it had peeled outward, and where it had not moved at all. The data began to whisper that the end might not match the legend. If the sea had swallowed a ship broken from the outside, the skin should have told one kind of tale. The skin was firm. The wounds that did exist were not where common sense said they would be. It was as if the vessel had been strong in all the places the world believed were weak, and weak where no one looked. That is what unnerved them. Myths are easy to defend. Measurements are not. The data whispered that the legend had lied, but down where sunlight died, truth had a way of clawing back through the dark. Descent into black pressure. The deeper they went, the more the ocean began to behave like a living thing, cold, silent, and endlessly patient. At that depth, every inch of the ship's steel hull groaned under pressure, strong enough to crush a submarine like a toy. 6,000 pounds per square inch. No sunlight, no movement, just weight and darkness. The drone's cameras saw what no diver could ever survive to witness. The exact moment light was swallowed whole by the black. The sea here wasn't water anymore. It was density, an invisible wall that punished every error. For the researchers, it was the perfect hiding place for a truth that had waited more than 80 years. The forbidden wreck sat on the edge of a volcanic ridge, halfway between the living ocean and its silent underworld. The ROV, small compared to what it hunted, moved like a cautious animal. Its operators on the surface ship barely breathed as they navigated through a snowfall of silt stirred by their own thrusters. Each pulse of sonar drew a ghostly outline on their monitors. A curved spine of metal, a fin, then a tower. The sheer scale of it dwarfed the drone. There, under miles of pressure, lay a ship that had once commanded the Atlantic, still proud even in ruin. The seabed itself had shaped around it. Ash, sand, and mineral dust had settled over the decades, sealing parts of the wreck like a sarcophagus. But the way it rested, the symmetry, the posture, was not what physics predicted. Ships that fall from the surface rarely land upright. They twist, they break, they scatter. This one looked deliberate, almost peaceful, as if someone had set it there and told it to sleep. What the team realized next would make them uneasy. The slope below the wreck was steep, a frozen avalanche of volcanic sand. For a ship of that size to stay upright, it must have slid after hitting the seafloor. A long descent, nearly a mile, scraping, bouncing, grinding, and still ending in perfect balance. That made no sense. The forces involved should have twisted the hull, torn it open, scattered its structure like confetti. Instead, the body looked whole, defiant, untouched by the violence of impact. The stern, however, was gone. A ragged amputation trailing behind in a field of twisted beams. That kind of precision separation could not come from chance. Either something tore it away before the ship struck bottom, or something inside forced it off. The ROV's lights carved through the black and fell on the wound. The edge of the rupture was smooth in places, jagged in others, with thin curls of metal bent outward like ribbons of burnt paper. There were no blast cones, no pattern of internal fire. Instead, the gash looked mechanical, like pressure had pushed from within until the steel surrendered. It was an absence with intent. The team logged the coordinates and hovered over the broken edge, letting sonar read the contours that the light couldn't reach. Data streamed upward in silence. On the monitor, the line of damage began to form a map of stress and force, and with it, an idea that made everyone hesitate. What if the final violence wasn't from battle at all, but from the ocean itself, finishing what men began? The further the drone explored, the more this thought gained shape. The sea here was a slow executioner. Anything hollow is doomed to collapse. Pressure does not forgive air. The wreck's integrity should have folded long ago, yet it hadn't. Its compartments still held shape, meaning its design had resisted even this crushing blackness for decades. Every intact corridor and sealed compartment meant trapped air pockets, silent survivors of an ancient catastrophe. That air, compressed now beyond imagination, was what made this exploration so dangerous. One wrong move could trigger a collapse. Even a single camera bump could cause the structure to implode. The team moved with surgical precision, guiding the ROV along the hull's scars without touching. The deeper they searched, the clearer it became. The ocean wasn't just hiding history. It was protecting a secret too large to stay buried. Upright giant, missing stern. When the drone stabilized over the wreck's midsection, the operators finally saw the full magnitude of the contradiction. From above, the battleship looked whole, intact, defiant, almost proud. The hull stretched more than 800 feet, its frame straight, its posture balanced, like a sleeping colossus. Yet the illusion broke when the camera swept toward the stern. The final quarter of the ship simply wasn't there. It had been torn clean off. No graceful collapse, no crumbling edges, just a brutal separation, as if the ocean itself had reached up and ripped the back of the ship away. What remained was an open wound, mangled metal, twisted beams, and layers of armor that ended in chaos. The team sat in silence as the drone traced the edges of the destruction. The lines didn't lie, but they didn't tell the story history claimed either. By all wartime accounts, this ship should have been a mangled carcass, shattered by torpedoes, gutted by explosions, ripped apart from the outside. But what the cameras showed was eerily opposite. The upper decks bore the scars of relentless shell fire, yes, but below that chaos, the thick armor belt remained mostly unscathed. The belt, nearly 13 inches of hardened steel designed to resist anything afloat, stood as solid as the day it was forged. There were only a handful of visible penetrations, maybe 8 in total, and none large enough to have caused catastrophic flooding. The drone followed those scars, each one a small crater of violence surrounded by untouched plating. If this was the damage that ended a super battleship, then physics itself was out of order. The operators adjusted the ROV's lights downward, revealing long, smooth tears stretching beneath the armor line. At first glance, they looked like torpedo damage, long gashes that seemed to open the belly of the beast. But there was no evidence of explosive fracturing. The edges were too clean, the bends too uniform. Explosions tear outward. This damage pulls inward. These were not the signatures of blast waves. They were the fingerprints of pressure and impact. The team realized what they were seeing was the scars of descent, not combat. The 50,000-ton warship had hit the seafloor with unimaginable force, sliding down a volcanic slope for over a mile. The immense friction had peeled away her lower plates like skin dragged over rock. The ocean floor, not the Royal Navy, had done the final cutting. That discovery changed everything. The narrative of the ship's demise, its fiery destruction under enemy bombardment, was cracking apart. The footage suggested that when she slipped beneath the surface, her hull was still remarkably intact. That meant she hadn't been torn apart in battle, but rather had died in silence, swallowed whole.
More than 64 years after one of the first Allied victories of World War II, the pride of Hitler's navy may soon be making a comeback. This is the wreck of the Graf Spee, lying on the seafloor just 65 feet under the South Atlantic.
The collapse happened after. And if that was true, then how had she sunk? If the hull had remained sealed, she shouldn't have gone down so fast. Ships this large don't just vanish without catastrophic external breaches. But the evidence pointed to something more deliberate, more controlled. The flooding came from the inside. The team expanded their sweep across the wreck's flank, and the ROV illuminated a nameplate half buried in silt. Letters corroded yet legible. The pride of the German Kriegsmarine still visible through 80 years of rust. Around it, They found traces of burn marks and jagged cuts that didn't match shellfire patterns. It looked surgical, not random. Whoever caused that damage knew what they were doing. Then, near the central tower, the drone found something even more disturbing. Several circular ports appeared forced open from the inside. They were release valves, emergency scuttling systems. Every navy has them, but they are used for one thing only: to deliberately sink your own ship. What they found outside defied logic. What waited inside would defy belief. Cameras inside a tomb. When the underwater drone finally breached the shattered hull and entered the interior of the wreck, the ocean swallowed the light whole. The beams from its floodlights illuminated only fragments. Corridors collapsed like veins, rusted ladders, and drifting wires that waved in the current like slow-moving ghosts. Every foot forward felt like trespassing into a grave that the sea itself guarded. The camera crept through the opening in silence, transmitting images that no one on the surface was prepared to see. The ship wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a tomb. The ROV's lights flickered across rooms still frozen in time. Crew quarters with bunks half buried in silt. Coffee mugs fused to tables due to corrosion. A typewriter, its keys covered in sea dust, letters still faintly visible under the grime. Personal artifacts, the kind that make war stories human, lay scattered everywhere. Shoes, dog tags, and pieces of uniforms turned into ribbons by salt and decay. For the operators watching from above, it was like entering a photograph that never ended. They weren't exploring history. They were disturbing memories. But as the drone pushed deeper, the tone shifted from emotional to forensic. Something about the wreck's interior geometry was wrong. The ceilings weren't simply collapsed. They were pressed downward, bent as if by invisible weight. Measuring tools on the ROV confirmed it. Some decks had been crushed by as much as 10 to 13 feet. That kind of deformation doesn't come from external impact. It comes from internal collapse. The conclusion hit quickly. The ship hadn't been blown apart from the outside. It had been crushed from within as it filled with water. A slow, suffocating death caused by deliberate flooding. The next discovery cemented that idea. The drone located several open valves inside the engineering compartments, pipes, and bulkhead systems that should have been sealed tight during combat. They were all open. Nearby, in what had once been a machinery control room, they found two large, circular blast ports melted outward. The formation of the metal suggested controlled demolition, not chaotic explosion. This was the language of intent. The same scuttling process described by surviving officers decades ago was visible in the bones of the ship. The crew had done exactly what they claimed. They had opened her heart from the inside, letting the ocean rush in. The deeper the cameras ventured, the more haunting the imagery became. The ROV floated past a compartment where steel lockers had burst open, their contents spilling like a metallic waterfall. A corridor curved downward, warped by pressure, leading to what appeared to be the mess hall. Plates still lined a corroded counter, arranged in eerie order, as if the men had left mid-meal. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Each turn of the drone's camera felt like turning a page in a diary written in rust. Then the team reached the lower decks, the deepest parts of the ship where no diver had ever been. The readings showed the greatest compression here, the final evidence of the flooding sequence. It started in the stern, the engine compartments, and then advanced forward in perfect methodical order. That pattern was impossible by accident. The flooding followed design. Valves opened one after another, sinking the ship section by section. Historians would later note that this matched the standard German naval scuttling protocol, where crewmen, unable to escape, triggered the sequence themselves to ensure their ship never fell into enemy hands. In that moment, the camera stopped being a tool. It became a witness. As the cameras drifted through the silence, the question began to echo louder than any sonar ping. How did this grave come to be? The answer began decades earlier, when the sea was still alive with war. The pursuit that caged it. Long before it became a ghost beneath the waves, the ship was terror incarnate, a floating fortress built to rewrite the balance of power at sea. When it first left port under Hitler's direct orders, even Allied intelligence underestimated what it could do. It wasn't just a battleship. It was a message, a symbol of German naval supremacy, and a challenge thrown directly at the British Empire. Its design was an act of defiance, heavier, faster, deadlier than anything afloat. The ship was meant to dominate the Atlantic, to sever the lifeline that kept Britain alive. The ocean was its hunting ground, and the prey were convoys carrying food, fuel, and hope across the gray waters between continents. The ship's first and only mission began in May 1941 under the codename Operation Rheinübung. Its orders were simple but ruthless: break through into the Atlantic and destroy Allied supply lines. For a few days, it was invisible, its course masked by fog and deception. Then, at dawn on May 24, 1941, the world saw what it could do. The Bismarck met two of Britain's strongest warships, the HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the new HMS Prince of Wales. Within minutes, the Atlantic became a theater of horror. A single German shell found the Hood's weakness, an opening in her deck armor, and detonated her magazines. The explosion tore her apart so violently that sailors aboard other ships saw nothing but a wall of fire. 3 minutes later, she was gone. Only 3 men survived out of more than 1,400. That moment changed the war at sea. The invincible British fleet suddenly looked mortal. News of the Hood's destruction spread across the Atlantic like shockwaves. Churchill's response was immediate and cold: sink the Bismarck. Every ship capable of combat was ordered to hunt her down. Destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and entire squadrons abandoned their missions to join the chase. The Royal Navy turned the ocean into a net. But the Bismarck, though feared, wasn't invincible. One shell from the Prince of Wales had struck her bow during the battle, puncturing a fuel tank. It didn't cripple her, but it left a trail, a shimmering slick of oil across the water that told the hunters where to look. For nearly 2 days, the ship and her escort, the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, played cat and mouse with the British. Storms and fog cloaked them. Radio silence kept their location hidden. For a while, it seemed like the Bismarck might actually escape to the safety of occupied France. But fate rarely shows mercy to legends. At first light on May 26th, a Catalina flying boat patrolling hundreds of miles from land spotted the oil trail glinting in the waves. The message went out: target found. The British carrier HMS Ark Royal launched her torpedo bombers, the Swordfish, fragile biplanes made of wood and canvas, relics from another era. No one believed they could hurt a monster made of armor and steel. But luck, or destiny, intervened. Flying low in a storm, dodging anti-aircraft fire, one Swordfish released a torpedo that struck the stern. The explosion jammed the Bismarck's rudders. In that instant, the most powerful warship in the world became a prisoner of its own design. It could no longer steer. It could only circle helplessly in the open sea. The chase had ended in triumph, or so the victors thought. But beneath the waves, the real ending was still waiting to be written. Who sank it, really? For half a century, history insisted on one version of events. The British Navy had sunk the Bismarck. Their guns had blasted it to pieces, their torpedoes had sealed its fate, and justice had been served for the loss of the Hood. But then came the drones, unfeeling, precise, incapable of loyalty. Their footage told another story, one written not in pride or politics, but in physics and evidence. What they saw beneath the Atlantic wasn't a wreck torn apart by battle. It was a ship that had been deliberately, methodically brought down by its own crew. Every historian who saw the first images noticed the same thing. The armor belt, the thickest part of the hull, the shield that was supposed to take the brunt of the attack, was practically untouched. The torpedoes that supposedly ripped through it had left no external cavities, no twisted rupture marks consistent with explosives. Instead, the lower decks were crushed inward, decks bent down as if the ocean itself had folded the ship from within. Flooding from the outside creates chaos, jagged openings, asymmetrical deformation, and shattered seams. Flooding from the inside is controlled. It moves compartment by compartment, crushing the interior structure until the weight of water collapses the ship. That's exactly what the drones recorded. It matched perfectly with what German survivors had claimed all along, even when no one believed them. In post-war interrogations, officers from the Bismarck had described the last order they received: scuttle the ship. They said they opened flooding valves, set demolition charges, and sacrificed the vessel before the British could board it. For decades, their testimonies were dismissed as prideful excuses, an attempt to soften the humiliation of defeat. But the new footage vindicated them. The intact armor, the crushed decks, the open scuttling valves, every clue pointed toward deliberate self-destruction. The truth was even more chilling when pieced together in sequence. As the battle raged on the surface, with British shells pounding the superstructure, the Bismarck's crew below decks was carrying out a ritual they'd trained for, but hoped never to perform. The engineering teams broke open the watertight compartments one by one, flooding the ship from stern to bow. Explosive charges placed near the turbines and auxiliary rooms detonated with precision, ensuring that the ship would flood evenly and sink upright. It was the final act of control in a situation where they had none. And the evidence, 80 years later, confirmed it. The ship went down by her own command. Even the way the wreck rested on the seabed told the same story. The hull was upright, its symmetry almost eerie. Ships destroyed by combat don't die gracefully. They tumble, twist, and break apart. The Bismarck looked as though it had been laid to rest, not shattered. That kind of descent, steady, almost elegant, was the result of balanced flooding. The ship's internal structure gave way evenly, allowing her to slide into the abyss without capsizing. It was an engineer's death, not an explosion's chaos. But this revelation didn't only rewrite history, it unsettled it. The British had celebrated the Bismarck's sinking as retribution, a moral and military victory. The idea that the Germans had, in essence, chosen their own ending complicated that story. It meant the final act of the battle wasn't conquest, but defiance. The enemy had denied them the satisfaction of capture or surrender. Pride and self-determination had survived even in the jaws of defeat. It turned the wreck into something almost tragic, less a monument to loss, more a symbol of final dignity. Still, one mystery lingered. Why did the ship sink so quickly if the British were still firing? Some experts argue that the scuttling orders were given earlier than recorded, perhaps minutes before the final British salvo. Others believe that both forces, enemy fire and self-destruction, worked together. The bombardment made survival impossible, and the crew simply hastened the inevitable. Either way, the outcome was the same. The ship didn't die in surrender. It died by choice. For years, the Bismarck's death seemed to close the book on Germany's sea legends. But another ship, half a world away, was about to reopen it, and with it, a secret even darker than the first. The River Plate Vault. Thousands of miles from where the Bismarck rests in the North Atlantic lies another ship, a smaller, faster, but equally haunting ghost from Hitler's navy. The Admiral Graf Spee, once called the Phantom of the South Atlantic, met her end off the coast of Uruguay in December 1939, 2 years before the Bismarck went down. For decades, her wreck lay hidden beneath the murky waters of the River Plate, half buried in mud and forgotten. But in early 2025, the silence ended. A new generation of underwater drones was sent into her remains. What they found didn't just echo the Bismarck story. It exposed something even darker, something the world wasn't supposed to see. To understand the shock, you have to know the Graf Spee's history. She wasn't a massive battleship like the Bismarck, but a pocket battleship, a vessel built to cheat the Treaty of Versailles and outgun anything her size. She was fast, deadly, and efficient. In 1939, she prowled the South Atlantic under orders to destroy Allied shipping lines, sinking 9 merchant ships in just a few months. Yet her captain, Hans Langsdorff, wasn't a zealot. He was a naval officer from the old code, known for sparing enemy crews and treating prisoners with respect.
Of Captain Langsdorff. He benefited from his friendship with one of the last surviving officers of Graf Spee who lived in Uruguay.
Still, mercy couldn't protect him from the weight of propaganda and pride. When the British cornered the Graf Spee after the Battle of the River Plate, Langsdorff faced an impossible choice: fight against overwhelming odds or surrender the ship to neutral Uruguay. He chose a third option: to destroy her himself. On December 17, 1939, thousands watched from the Montevideo shoreline as explosions tore through the Graf Spee. Flames reached the sky, smoke blanketed the harbor, and the once proud warship sank in a slow, deliberate bow. Her captain, wrapped in the German flag, took his own life days later in Buenos Aires. The ship became a tomb, and then, over decades, a myth. The River Plate consumed her piece by piece until only silt and rumors remained. Some believed everything of value had already been salvaged. Others whispered that Langsdorff had hidden something inside before the ship went under. For years, those stories were dismissed. Then came the 2025 expedition, led by a multinational team of marine archaeologists and engineers armed with new technology. Compact drones equipped with photogrammetry rigs, sediment-penetrating radar, and ultra-high-frequency sonar. They wanted to map what was left before it disappeared completely. But the sonar readings they received told them something extraordinary. Several internal compartments, once believed to have collapsed, were still intact. One in particular caught their attention: a sealed room behind the ship's armored conning tower. The layout matched a section identified in German naval blueprints as a secondary communications vault. No diver had ever reached it. Until now. If this deep-sea investigation changed how you see the last hours of a forbidden World War II wreck, like this video, drop a comment with your take on the scuttling debate, and subscribe. And when you're ready for the next dive into hidden war secrets, watch the video on your screen now.